CIA veteran calls for US war on China and Russia, threatening nuclear strikes in Elite Foreign Policy magazine. A CIA and Pentagon veteran who helps run NATO's powerful think tank, the Atlantic Council, Matthew Koenig, published an article in Elite Foreign Policy magazine calling for US war on both China and Russia, including, quote, threatening non-strategic nuclear strikes, end quote. He has also advocated military strikes on Iran. That's by Benjamin Norton, published 13 hours ago. A veteran of the CIA and Pentagon who now helps to run one of the most powerful think tanks in Washington, Matthew Koenig, has published an article in highly influential Foreign Policy magazine calling for the United States to prepare to wage war on China and Russia. Koenig served in important national security state roles in the George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump administrations and has significant sway in D.C. foreign policy circles. Koenig insisted that the U.S. military should, quote, threaten non-strategic nuclear strikes, end quote, on China over Taiwan and Russia over Europe. Referring to Washington's conflict with Beijing and Moscow as a, quote, new Cold War, end quote, he also called for boosting the $768 billion annual U.S. military budget even further, maintaining that, quote, the United States can afford to outspend Russia and China at the same time, end quote. The CIA and Pentagon veteran emphasized that Washington must take on both Eurasian superpowers simultaneously in order to maintain U.S. unipolar hegemony, which he acknowledged is in decline. Oh, isn't this amazing? Wanting to destroy two countries because the U.S. must maintain its hegemonic full-spectrum dominance. It's truly astounding, the level, the mentality of these people, the arrogance. Koenig made these arguments in a widely circulated February 18 article in the Elite Foreign Policy magazine titled, quote, Washington must prepare for war with both Russia and China, end quote. Matthew Koenig currently serves as Deputy Director of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council, the de facto think tank of the US-led NATO military alliance. The Atlantic Council, which is funded by the US government, other Western governments, NATO, and the weapons industry, has massive influence in Washington, helping to craft foreign policy for every administration. In addition to his work for the CIA and Defense Department in the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations, Koenig was a national security advisor for the presidential campaigns of Republicans Mitt Romney in 2012 and Marco Rubio in 2016. He is also a live member of the Elite Council on Foreign Relations and a tenured professor of government and foreign service at Washington's prestigious Georgetown University. In short, Koenig is a highly influential figure in U.S. foreign policy circles with impeccable credentials, and his extremely hawkish views, calling for simultaneous U.S. war on China and Russia, reflect the opinions of many of his colleagues in Washington. Matthew Koenig encapsulated the view of many Washington foreign policy elites that the United States must wage war in order to maintain its unchallenged hegemonic power over the planet, writing, quote, the United States remains the world's leading power with global interests, and it cannot afford to choose between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. Instead, Washington and its allies should develop a defense strategy capable of deterring and, if necessary, defeating Russia and China at the same time. And by the way, I should have mentioned they're willing to basically destroy the whole planet rather than lose their unipolar full-spectrum dominance, or their attempts to have full-spectrum dominance. That's basically the bottom line. And according to Colonel Wilkinson, who was one of Colin Powell's colleagues, he says that's been a thread throughout the history of the military-industrial complex, that they would rather have destruction of a country than the possibility of losing America's dominance in certain regions. And in this case, it would be mutually assured destruction if you took on either country, because both countries are very, very closely aligned now, which is a really wise thing to be, considering they're both in the crosshairs of US empire. So the more countries that band together against the US empire, the better for all of them. So if one is attacked, the other one is going to come to their rescue, and then it's going to be, and so will Iran probably, and so will go to the rescue as well. It'll be mutually assured destruction, because if they're going to use nuclear weapons, that is not going to be tolerated at all by Russia and or China. See, this is just like Dr. Strangelove. Koenig is just like Dr. Strangelove. It's an insanity. This sort of talk is absolute insanity. Finally, if necessary, Washington could always take a page from its Cold War playbook and rely more heavily on nuclear weapons to offset the local, conventional advantages of its rivals. The presence of the US tactical nuclear weapons in Europe helped deter the massive Soviet Red Army for decades. Similarly, the United States could rely on threatening non-strategic nuclear strikes to deter and, as a last resort, thwart a Chinese amphibious invasion of Taiwan or a Russian tank incursion into Europe. Jeez Louise. To be sure, there are risks associated. They always have to make out like these countries want to just take over the world. They project, these lunatics project their own greed for power and their own sort of death drive on all these other countries, because none of these countries have shown any sort of any demonstration, nowhere near what the US has done, particularly since World War II, overthrowing countries left and right, 50 plus or 60 plus countries. They've overthrown, destabilized, meddled in, invaded over the last 60 or so years. And they're projecting this onto, Russia. Russia was never going to invade Ukraine. They were only going to do it if Ukraine actually attacked the Russian civilians in that country. Then they said they were going to intervene. But the US likes to, through their propaganda network of so many, the corporate media are just their stenographers. And through the corporate media, they put out propaganda after propaganda over the years that suddenly Russia is this terrible demon, Putin is a demon, and all they want to do is take over the world. And the same with China. Since Obama and the pivot to Asia in 2014, it's been nothing but anti-China propaganda, which feeds into the underlying racism of many in the West. And this unfortunately then comes home to roost. And now we have, this demented lunatic trying to encourage, nuclear strikes on two great powers, which could end the planet, basically. It could be mutually assured destruction for everybody. That's how dangerous this propaganda has been. This Russiagate stuff, all the anti-China propaganda, blaming China for for COVID-19 and all of that, and all the other things that they put out about China. I mean, the propaganda, until we actually have a fourth estate that actually holds governments to account, holds their feet to the fire. This is the sort of treacherous and dangerous situation we're going to be continually put in. I mean, the weapons industry fund a lot of the corporate media, as does Big Pharma. To be sure, there are risks associated with nuclear deterrence, but nuclear weapons have played a foundational role in US defense strategy for 3/4 of a century and will likely continue to do so for decades to come. Warning that, quote, Moscow and Beijing are forging a closer strategic partnership, including on military matters, end quote. Kroenig insisted that the United States must drastically increase military spending to, quote, outspend Russia and China at the same time, end quote. Oh, how convenient. How convenient for the weapons industry. By the way, I had a look at the stocks of Lockheed Martin and all those various, Raytheon and all those various weapons industries and how they do on the stock exchange. And it's amazing how well and how healthy those companies are. And it is also fascinating how many public members of the public have shares in, for example, Lockheed Martin. I mean, 26 million or something shares are owned by the public of that company. There are members of the public who are also buying into these wars by paying out for shares and investing in those companies. First, Washington should increase defense spending, contrary to those who claim that constrained resources will force tough choices. The United States can afford to outspend Russia and China at the same time. The United States possesses 24% of the global GDP, compared to a combined 19% in China and Russia. This year, the United States will spend $778 billion on defense compared to only $310 billion in Russia and China. I read today that there's been something like $210 million or something spent every day for the last 20 years in Afghanistan. And now you probably heard that the Biden administration, instead of giving back Afghanistan the $8 billion or something that they've stolen from Afghanistan, which is causing a great famine in Afghanistan, they're going to use, they said, I think it's half of that money. Biden said he's going to use half that money and give it to the 9/11 the 9/11 families or something, even though those people, the Afghani people, have nothing to do with 9/11. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. And these Afghani children and Afghan families are now starving because the US has stolen their money. This is what the US does all the time. I think it even it's stolen money from Venezuela, billions of dollars. Moreover, the United States could go so far as to double defense spending, currently 2.8% of GDP, and still remain below its Cold War average, close to 7% of GDP. Indeed, given that this new Cold War is every bit as dangerous as the last one, a meaningful increase in defense spending focused on the 21st century's emerging defense technologies is in order. I'd like to see Koenig's bank account. I wonder, eventually how he's going to be repaid by these weapons industries for this pitch. In short, even if this new strategic competition becomes a 2 versus 1 arms race, Washington is likely to prevail. See, that is absolute insanity because they won't prevail. He called for US allies to significantly increase their military spending as well, writing, European allies should invest in armor and artillery while Asian allies buy naval mines, Harpoon missiles, and submarines, end quote. Koenig noted that the Joe Biden administration is soon expected to publish a new U.S. national defense strategy, which will essentially call for Washington to focus exclusively on containing China, not Russia. But this strategy was allegedly delayed because of the Ukraine crisis. Can you imagine China talking about containing the U.S. and also basically sailing their ships up and down the coast of California or up and down the coast past, the coasts of either side of the United States, basically, and the US putting up with that? I mean, that is essentially what they have been doing war drills, war games in the South China Sea and around there, lining up in Darwin in Northern Territory in Australia, having lots of troops there, basically, saber rattling constantly, year after year. The same, with Russia, basically moving NATO closer and closer despite promises, which you can never ever believe the US and their promises. They break every single one of them. But despite the promises to Gorbachev many years ago that they would never ever bring NATO up to Russia's borders. And yet this is what they're doing, and expect that Russia would be totally fine with that. Some of the policymakers have called for easing tensions with Moscow and trying to form an alliance with Russia against China, but Koenig argued this is not, quote, not realistic, end quote. This is by no means the first time Matthew Koenig has advocated for a US war. In 2012, he published an article in Foreign Affairs, the official journal of the Elite Council of Foreign Relations, calling for the US military to launch attacks on Iran. In 2021, Koenig spoke at an anti-Iran conference organized by the extremist Mujahideen-e-Khalq, MEK, I can't pronounce that, MEK cult, which many hawkish figures in Washington have supported to try to bring about regime change in Tehran. He praised MEK Front, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, for supposed intelligence it had gathered on Tehran's alleged nuclear program. Other CIA veterans propose U.S. war on China. Matthew Koenig is certainly not the only U.S. intelligence official calling for a war on China. In November 2021, another CIA veteran, David Sauer, published an op-ed in The Hill titled, quote, America must prepare for war with China over Taiwan, end quote. And by the way, I've mentioned this before, but Crystal Ball and Saagar Engeti's show, Breaking Points, which is just a continuation of their show, The Rising, on The Hill, which is that neoconservative outlet, The Hill. They're still pushing, via Saagar Engeti, they're still pushing the anti-China propaganda all the time on there. I haven't watched them in recent months, but they were doing it, and you hear about it through other people. But Saagar Engeti has never stopped, and his hero, Tucker Carlson, never stops pushing a war on China. So, for all the people, I don't know why people keep including these people as part of the left, referring to them and all of this, or referring to Tucker Carlson because even a broken clock is right twice a day. Why they keep referring to him as if he's some sort of anti-imperialist when he's pushing a war on China all the time. He's dumping on the left all the time. He's dumping on Black Lives Matter all the time. I don't know, and yet they do. There are people that keep referring to him, keep including him, and at some point you have to really, really have to wonder about the people that keep calling out and keep including Tucker Carlson as some sort of anti-imperialist that speaks the same kind of language as the real left. And we really have to question the people that have been grifting to the right, who've been included in the real left, but now through constant anti-vaxxer promotion, propaganda, and now, pushing the right-wing narrative that the Canadian trucker protests are actual working people's protests, which they're not. And even though they know better than that, they're still pushing that. And then they start to conflate the whole thing together, like they did with the vaccine efficacy and the mandates and the passports. Here they're conflating the emergency powers thing, which I don't think is a good idea at all, even if it is for a protest that is backed by Conservative Party politicians and dark money and is basically a fascist, quote-unquote, trucker protest. We have to really start to reassess, what is a leftist, and when do you have to cut ties with people who seem to be grifting more and more and more to the right. Like I said about Max Blumenthal, I was wondering what he was going to do next. And voila, now he's pushing the right-wing narrative about the Canadian trucker protests as if it's some sort of organic and it's some sort of a working people's protest, when it is not that. And if you've watched my recent video where I read out Ben Norton's Multipolarista article about the Canadian trucker protests, it's very clear that it is not an organic movement, and it is certainly not a working people's protest. So I'm sure Max Blumenthal knows that. So this is what his next move, which still involves COVID, anti-vaxxer stuff, and what will be his next thing? What will be the next right-wing thing that he does? So let's just, make a note of this, because I don't see this stopping, this kind of thing that Jimmy Dore has been doing, that Max Blumenthal has been doing, that to some extent Jackson Hinkle has been doing, and even some other leftists who say they're leftists. I'm not going to call them out as yet because I just want to see what happens in the future. But, it's disturbing, to say the least. Anyway, that's the end of the article. So Ben has posted this, America must prepare for war with China over Taiwan. That's the article by David Sauer, the other problematic neocon warmonger. Anyway, that's from Ben Norton from Multipolarista, and you can find that on his site, multipolarista.com. Thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Thanks, Nicholas Mariga. Till next time. Bye for now.